What if I told you that the biggest mistake a cheating husband ever made was humiliating his wife in front of 300 people without knowing she was actually his boss's boss? I'm Name, and the story I'm about to share will leave you absolutely speechless. This is about a woman who discovered the ultimate betrayal, but instead of crying, she chose war. And honey, when I tell you this, revenge was legendary. Drop a in the comments if you're ready for some serious justice and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with strong women worldwide. Hit that subscribe button because trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. But first, let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're standing in a beautiful ballroom, champagne in hand, watching your husband of 2 decades announce to everyone that he's leaving you for his boss. Now imagine their faces when they realize who you really are. This is the night everything changed. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystal shattering against the marble floor of the Driskill Hotel's grand ballroom as my husband of 23 years stood at the podium, his arm wrapped possessively around his boss's waist. I know this comes as a surprise to many of you. David's voice carried across the room filled with Austin's business elite. But Victoria and I have found something special together, something real, and life's too short to waste on. His eyes found mine across the crowded room, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved. Then it vanished. On arrangements that no longer serve us. The collective gasp from 300 guests felt like a physical blow. But what made my knees buckle wasn't just the public humiliation, it was watching my husband announce his affair at the very company retreat I had been secretly funding for the past 5 years. Because what David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the mysterious investor who had saved Sterling Digital Solutions from bankruptcy, the one they all credited with their current success, was standing in the back of the room in a navy blue dress, watching her life implode in real time. 24 hours earlier, everything had been perfect. Or at least it had looked perfect from the outside, which was all that had ever seemed to matter to David. I had been arranging white roses in our Westlake Hills kitchen when he'd bounded through the front door with the kind of energy I hadn't seen from him in years. At 51, David Harper still cut an impressive figure, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident smile that had first caught my attention at a charity auction decades ago, when we were both young and hungry for success. "Sweetheart, you'll never guess what happened today," he'd said, kissing my cheek with distracted affection. "Victoria's decided to make the retreat announcement this weekend. She thinks it's time." I'd looked up from the roses, noting how his eyes lit up when he said her name. Victoria Sterling had been the CEO of Sterling Digital for 3 years now, having taken over when her father retired. She was brilliant, ambitious, and at 38, exactly the kind of woman who would turn heads in any boardroom. "What kind of announcement?" I'd asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. "Company restructuring, new partnerships, boring business stuff," David had said, but there was something in his tone that felt rehearsed. "She wants all the senior staff there with their spouses. It'll be good for morale." I'd nodded and returned to my flowers, playing the role I'd perfected over 2 decades of marriage, the supportive wife who asked just enough questions to seem interested, but not so many as to appear intrusive. What David had never bothered to discover was that his boring business stuff was actually my specialty. While he'd climbed the corporate ladder at Sterling Digital, earning his position as senior marketing director through what he believed was pure talent and charm, I had been quietly building an empire of my own. Harper Investments had started as a small wealth management firm when David was still struggling to make his mark in Austin's competitive business scene. Over the years, it had grown into something far more substantial, a private equity company with a portfolio worth over $800 million. David knew I worked in finance, of course. He'd even bragged about it to his colleagues when it suited him, introducing me as my wife, the money expert, at dinner parties. But he'd never paid enough attention to understand the scope of what I'd built. To him, I was Evelyn Harper, the woman who managed our personal investments and had a cute little business on the side. He had no idea that Harper Investments owned controlling interests in dozens of companies across Texas, including the very company that employed him. Sterling Digital had come onto my radar 5 years ago when they were drowning in debt and desperately seeking investors. Victoria's father, Robert Sterling, had built a solid regional marketing firm, but he lacked the vision and capital needed to compete in the digital age. When Victoria took over, she'd immediately understood that the company needed substantial investment to survive. That's when I'd stepped in, though not as Evelyn Harper. I'd learned early in my career that being David Harper's wife in Austin's business community came with certain assumptions about my capabilities and seriousness. So I'd created Meridian Holdings, a shell company that allowed me to invest without the baggage of my personal relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd saved my husband's company without him ever knowing. Victoria had been desperate enough to accept investment from a mysterious benefactor who preferred to remain anonymous. She'd assumed Meridian Holdings was backed by some reclusive tech billionaire from California. She had no idea she was pitching to the wife of one of her employees. Over the past 5 years, I'd watched Sterling Digital transform under Victoria's leadership and my capital injection. The company had tripled in size, expanded into 3 new markets, and become one of Austin's most successful marketing firms. David's career had soared along with it: better salary, prestigious clients' recognition in the industry. He'd credited his success to his own talents, never suspecting that his wife had engineered his professional ascension. That Friday evening, as I'd watched him pack for the company retreat, I'd felt a familiar mixture of pride and melancholy. Pride in what I'd built both professionally and personally. Melancholy because the man I'd supported and loved for over 2 decades had never once asked me about the details of my work or shown genuine curiosity about my achievements. "This could be the weekend that changes everything for us," David had said, folding his lucky tie, the Hermes one I'd bought him for his 40th birthday. "Victoria says there might be opportunities for advancement if this announcement goes well." I'd smiled and told him I was proud of him meaning it, despite the growing distance I'd felt between us over the past year. David had been working longer hours, taking more business trips, and showing the kind of intense focus on his career that I remembered from our early marriage. I'd attributed it to midlife motivation, the desire to prove himself in an increasingly competitive industry. What I hadn't recognized were the signs that would seem so obvious in retrospect: the extra attention to his appearance, the secretive phone calls that ended when I entered the room, the way he talked about Victoria, with an admiration that went beyond professional respect. The drive to the Driskill Hotel Saturday evening had been pleasant enough. David had been in an excellent mood, humming along to the radio and pointing out the beautiful sunset over Lake Austin. I'd worn my navy blue dress, the one he'd always said brought out my eyes, and felt genuinely excited about an evening celebrating the company's success. The retreat had drawn an impressive crowd. Austin's business community had turned out in force to honor Sterling Digital's achievements, and the hotel's ballroom buzzed with conversations about market trends, new acquisitions, and industry gossip. I'd moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades attending these events, making small talk with people who knew me as David Harper's wife, but had no idea about my professional accomplishments. Victoria had looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that managed to be both elegant and commanding. She'd worked the room with the confidence of someone who'd built something significant and knew it. When she'd stopped to chat with David and me, her handshake had been firm, her smile warm, and her attention seemed genuinely focused on our conversation. "Mrs. Harper, it's always such a pleasure to see you," she'd said. "David talks about you constantly. He's so proud of your work in finance." The comment had stung more than it should have. David talked about my work in the same way he might mention a favorite hobby, something pleasant and harmless that kept me busy. Victoria's tone suggested she'd absorbed his dismissive attitude toward my career. "Thank you," I'd replied graciously, "and congratulations on Sterling Digital's continued success. The company's growth has been remarkable." "We've been incredibly fortunate," Victoria had said, her eyes meeting David's in a way that made something cold settle in my chest. "The right team, the right opportunities, the right partnerships." I'd excused myself to refresh my drink, needing space to process the undercurrent I'd sensed in their interaction. Standing at the bar, I'd watched them from across the room, noting the way they leaned toward each other when they talked, the easy familiarity in their body language, the looks that lingered just a moment too long. That's when I'd started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. The evening had proceeded normally until Victoria took the podium to address the crowd. She'd begun with the usual corporate pleasantries, thanking the staff, celebrating recent victories, acknowledging the support of families and partners. But something in her demeanor had changed as she spoke, a building excitement that seemed to go beyond typical business announcements. "But tonight," she'd continued, "I want to share something more personal, something that represents not just Sterling Digital's future, but the future of everyone who believes in following their hearts, even when it requires difficult choices." The room had grown quiet, sensing that whatever was coming would be significant. I'd felt David tense beside me, his hand finding mine in what I'd initially interpreted as nervous excitement about some major business development. Sometimes in life we find ourselves in situations that no longer serve our growth or happiness, Victoria had said, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on David. And sometimes we're fortunate enough to find connections that remind us what genuine partnership looks like. That's when David had stood up, his face flushed with emotion I'd initially mistaken for professional pride. Victoria had extended her hand to him, and he'd walked to the front of the room as if in a trance, leaving me sitting alone at our table with a growing sense of dread. "David Harper has been more than just Sterling Digital's senior marketing director," Victoria had announced as he joined her at the podium. "He's been my partner in every sense of the word, and tonight we wanted to share with all of you that we've decided to build a life together." The words had hit me like a physical blow, but it was David's next statement that had truly shattered my world. "I know this comes as a surprise to many of you, but Victoria and I have found something special together, something real, and life's too short to waste on arrangements that no longer serve us." Arrangements. 23 years of marriage, and he'd reduced our relationship to an arrangement that no longer served him. The applause that followed had been scattered and uncomfortable, the kind of polite response people give when they're witnessing something they don't quite understand or approve of. I'd sat frozen in my chair, watching my husband publicly humiliate me while announcing his affair with a woman whose success I had secretly funded. But perhaps the most devastating part was the look on David's face. Pure joy, as if he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. The man who'd shared my bed for over 2 decades, who'd built a life with me, who'd benefited from my support and sacrifice, was glowing with happiness about abandoning our marriage. I'd left the ballroom in a haze, walking through the hotel's ornate lobby on unsteady legs. The valet had retrieved my car with professional sympathy, clearly recognizing me as the woman who'd just been publicly discarded. The drive home to Westlake Hills had passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. Now, Sunday morning, I sat in my home office staring at the computer screen that held the keys to everything David thought he knew about his life. As Meridian Holdings, I had access to Sterling Digital's complete financial records, employee communications, and strategic planning documents. What I discovered in the past 12 hours had revealed a betrayal that went far deeper than a simple extramarital affair. David and Victoria's relationship hadn't been the spontaneous romance they'd presented to the crowd. According to the email threads I'd uncovered, they'd been involved for over 8 months, conducting their affair with the systematic planning of a military operation. Worse, they'd been discussing their future together with the casual assumption that I would simply disappear quietly grateful for whatever financial settlement David chose to offer. But it was the final email in the chain that had truly opened my eyes to the scope of their deception. Victoria had written to David just 3 days earlier. Once we're married, combining our resources with the Meridian Holdings investment will make us one of the most powerful couples in Austin's business community. Your wife will never know what hit her. They weren't just planning to destroy my marriage, they were planning to build their empire on the very investment I'd made to save Victoria's company. The anonymous benefactor they credited with Sterling Digital's success was about to become their unwitting victim. As I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen to make coffee, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. At 49, I still looked much as I had when David first fell in love with me. Auburn hair with only hints of silver green eyes that people often commented on a figure maintained through years of yoga and healthy living. But something in my expression had changed overnight. The trusting woman who'd believed in the power of love and commitment had been replaced by someone who understood that trust once broken could never be fully repaired. David's Mercedes was still in Victoria's driveway when I drove past her downtown loft that afternoon. I hadn't planned to spy on them, but something had drawn me to see their happiness for myself. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them moving around her apartment with the easy intimacy of established lovers. They were building their new life on the ruins of mine, using resources I'd provided to fund their betrayal. But what David and Victoria didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that the woman they'd dismissed as a discarded wife actually held more power over their future than they could possibly comprehend. The mysterious Meridian Holdings investor they planned to exploit was sitting in her car outside Victoria's building, watching them celebrate and beginning to formulate a response that would teach them both the dangerous cost of underestimating Evelyn Harper. The game was about to change, and this time I would be the one writing the rules. The notification chime from my laptop pulled me back from the window where I'd been watching David's car in Victoria's driveway. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the email that had just arrived in my Meridian Holdings account, an automated report from Sterling Digital's security system that I received monthly as the primary investor. What I saw made my blood run cold. The report showed unusual after-hours access to the executive floor over the past 6 months. Victoria's keycard had been used to enter the building on weekends and holidays, often accompanied by a second entry, David's guest access code, just minutes later. But it wasn't just the frequency that caught my attention. It was the pattern. Every Friday evening, every Sunday afternoon, sometimes Tuesday nights when David had told me he was working late on client presentations. I scrolled through the timestamps with growing horror, cross-referencing them with my own calendar. David's emergency meetings coincided perfectly with these after-hours visits. The client dinners that ran late matched the Saturday evening entries. The strategy sessions with the team aligned with Sunday afternoon access logs. My husband and his lover had been conducting their affair in the office I was paying for, using the building I'd saved from foreclosure as their private love nest. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I pushed back from my desk and walked to the kitchen, my legs unsteady, my chest tight with rage and humiliation. Through the bay window, Austin's skyline shimmered in the late afternoon heat, the same view I'd shared with David just 48 hours ago, when we'd toasted what he'd called our future together. How long had he been lying to my face? How many times had he come home from Victoria's arms and kissed me goodnight? How many mornings had he looked me in the eye over coffee and planned another deception? I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands, though it was barely 4 o'clock. At my age, I'd learned that some discoveries required immediate fortification. The Chardonnay was one David had selected for our anniversary dinner last month, praising its perfect balance, while he was secretly planning to abandon our marriage. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so devastating. Returning to my office, I forced myself to dig deeper into the digital evidence, drawing on skills I'd honed over 25 years of investigating investment opportunities and due diligence. If David and Victoria thought they could outsmart me, they were about to learn how thoroughly they'd miscalculated. The next discovery came through Sterling Digital's internal communication system. As the majority shareholder through Meridian Holdings, I had access to executive email accounts for security and compliance purposes, a level of oversight that Victoria had agreed to in exchange for the investment capital that had saved her company. Victoria's emails revealed a woman who was not only conducting an affair, but systematically planning the destruction of my marriage with the precision of a corporate takeover. There were messages to her attorney about preparing for a complex situation involving a high net worth spouse. There were conversations with a private investigator about gathering information on financial assets that might be hidden in a dissolution. But the email that made my hands clench into fists was one she'd sent to her sister in Dallas just 2 weeks ago. David's wife is exactly what you'd expect one of those women who thinks being married to a successful man makes her important. She has no idea what's coming, and honestly, it's going to be a relief for David to finally be with someone who actually understands business. I'm doing him a favor by showing him what a real partnership looks like. The casual cruelty of her words cut deeper than David's public humiliation. This woman whose career I had saved, whose success I had funded, was dismissing me as some kind of trophy wife who'd stumbled into wealth through marriage. She had no idea that the real partnership she was offering David was built on my money, my investment, my strategic planning. I opened David's email account next, using the administrative access I'd gained through Meridian Holdings' IT security protocols. What I found there was even more devastating than Victoria's correspondence. David had been sharing intimate details about our marriage, our finances, and our personal life with Victoria for months. He'd forwarded her photographs from our private family gatherings, mocking my need to document everything and my exhausting perfectionism. He'd complained about my work schedule, describing my business meetings as Evelyn's little finance club and joking about how I played investor with our money. But the message that shattered what remained of my heart was one he'd sent just last week. I can't wait to be free of all this suburban wife nonsense. 23 years of pretending to be impressed by her business acumen when all she really does is move money around that I helped earn. Victoria, you've shown me what it feels like to be with a woman who actually builds something meaningful. I helped earn, as if my advanced degrees from Wharton, my decades of experience in private equity, my successful track record of identifying and developing profitable investments were somehow dependent on his modest marketing salary. The laptop screen blurred as tears of rage filled my eyes. This man, whom I'd supported through career setbacks, celebrated through successes, and loved through all the ordinary challenges of building a life together, had been systematically undermining and belittling me while planning his escape. But as I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal, something unexpected began to happen. The hurt and humiliation that had consumed me since last night started transforming into something colder and more focused. David and Victoria had made a crucial error in their planning. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. They saw Evelyn Harper, the quiet wife who arranged flowers and attended charity luncheons. They had no idea they were betraying one of Austin's most successful private investors, a woman who'd built an empire by outthinking opponents and identifying weaknesses others missed. I opened a new browser window and began researching Victoria Sterling with the same methodical approach I used for potential investments. If she wanted to destroy my life and steal my husband, she was going to discover that her target was far more formidable than she'd imagined. What I uncovered over the next 3 hours revealed vulnerabilities that Victoria had worked very hard to keep hidden. Her MBA from Rice University was legitimate, but her undergraduate degree from Harvard was not a fact that could be verified with a single phone call to their registrar's office. Her previous position as senior strategy consultant at a prestigious firm in Dallas had lasted only 8 months before she was quietly asked to resign for cultural fit issues. Business speak for behavior that made her colleagues uncomfortable. Most interesting of all, Victoria Sterling was not the successful, independent woman she presented herself to be. According to public records, she'd filed for bankruptcy just 4 years ago, drowning in credit card debt and struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment. Her transformation into Austin's rising business star had happened only after she'd secured the Meridian Holdings investment for Sterling Digital. She'd built her entire public persona on the foundation of my money. The discovery filled me with a cold satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. David was abandoning his successful, accomplished wife for a woman whose career was an elaborate fiction funded by the very woman she was betraying. As darkness fell over Austin, I closed my laptop and walked through the house David and I had shared for over a decade. Every room held memories of the life we'd built together, the kitchen where we'd hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, the living room where we'd watched movies on quiet Sunday afternoons, the bedroom where he'd held me close and whispered promises about growing old together. But now these memories felt contaminated by the knowledge of his deception. How many of those dinner parties had he spent thinking about Victoria? How many quiet evenings had he been planning his escape? How many promises had been lies from the moment he spoke them? Standing in our master bedroom, looking at the bed where my husband had held me just days ago while his heart belonged to another woman, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. David and Victoria wanted to destroy my life and build their happiness on the ruins. They were welcome to try. But they were about to learn that the woman they dismissed as a suburban housewife had resources, skills, and determination they couldn't begin to comprehend. The game was changing, and this time I would be playing to win. I had work to do. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that follows life-altering revelations. I sat in my home office at 6 a.m., surrounded by 3 monitors, a secure phone line, and the tools of a trade David had never bothered to understand. 25 years of building Harper Investments had taught me that information was power, and power required precision. The woman who'd arranged flowers and smiled graciously at dinner parties was gone. In her place sat someone David had never met, the forensic investigator who'd uncovered embezzlement schemes worth millions, the strategic analyst who'd identified market manipulation before federal regulators, the woman who'd built an empire by seeing what others missed. My first call was to Marcus Chen, my head of security at Harper Investments. At 62, Marcus was a former FBI financial crimes investigator who joined my firm 5 years ago. When his government pension wasn't enough to support his ailing wife's medical expenses, he'd proven invaluable in vetting potential investments and protecting our assets from corporate fraud. "Evelyn, you're calling early," Marcus said, his voice alert despite the hour. "What do you need?" "I need a complete background investigation on 2 subjects," I said, my voice steady. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Digital, and David Harper, Senior Marketing Director at the same company. I want financial records communication patterns, travel history, and any connection between them that goes beyond professional interaction. There was a pause. Marcus had worked for me long enough to recognize the tone I used when something serious was unfolding. This is personal, isn't it? It's about to become very professional, I replied. How quickly can you have preliminary results? Give me 48 hours for the surface layer, a week for anything deeper. Evelyn, if this involves David, it involves David choosing to destroy our marriage for a woman whose career I've been funding without her knowledge, I said flatly. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide how to respond. Marcus whistled softly. I'll start immediately. And Evelyn, I'm sorry. After ending the call, I turned to my computer and began my own investigation using resources I developed over decades in private equity. The first step was financial forensics, following the money trail that would reveal the true scope of David and Victoria's relationship. Sterling Digital's corporate credit card records showed a pattern of charges that made my stomach clench. Expensive dinners at Austin's most romantic restaurants, weekend trips to Dallas and San Antonio, purchases at jewelry stores and boutique hotels, all charged to company accounts, all authorized by Victoria as client entertainment or team-building activities. They'd been funding their affair with money from the company I owned, but the financial impropriety was just the beginning. Using my access to Sterling Digital's human resources system, I discovered that Victoria had been systematically restructuring the company to eliminate potential witnesses to her relationship with David. 3 promising female employees had been transferred to remote positions or laid off entirely after they'd expressed concerns about the CEO's special attention to David. Sarah Martinez, a talented marketing coordinator who'd worked closely with David, had been terminated just 2 months ago. Her exit interview, buried deep in HR files, revealed uncomfortable truths. Mr. Harper has been receiving preferential treatment that creates an unfair work environment. Projects are assigned based on personal relationships rather than merit. The CEO's behavior toward Mr. Harper is inappropriate and makes other employees uncomfortable. Victoria had destroyed Sarah's career to protect her affair. I made note of Sarah's contact information. Terminated employees often made excellent witnesses when they had nothing left to lose. The deeper I dug, the more systematic the deception became. Victoria had been using her position to create a perfect environment for conducting an affair with my husband. Business trips were scheduled to overlap their hotel bookings, always place them in adjoining rooms or the same suite. Conference expenses included romantic dinners and activities that had nothing to do with Sterling Digital's business interests. But it was the personal email account I discovered that revealed the true scope of their betrayal. Victoria had been careless with her digital security, using the same password for multiple accounts, a mistake that made accessing her personal communications surprisingly simple. Her Gmail account contained 8 months of correspondence with David that read like a master class in manipulation and systematic deception. The earliest messages showed Victoria identifying David as a target, researching his background, his marriage, his vulnerabilities. She discovered that David felt underappreciated at work and undervalued at home, classic midlife crisis material that she'd exploited with surgical precision. David, you're so much more talented than this company recognizes, she'd written in one early email. With your creative vision and my business connections, we could build something extraordinary together. The right partnership could transform both our careers. She'd been recruiting him like a corporate asset, appealing to his ego and ambition while positioning herself as the key to his untapped potential. The emails grew more intimate over time, but they remained strategic. Victoria never wrote anything that could be construed as workplace harassment if discovered. Instead, she'd cultivated an emotional affair that slowly drew David away from his marriage and into her web of influence. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd met you 20 years ago, David had written in one particularly painful message. before obligations and expectations locked me into a life that feels smaller every day. Obligations and expectations. Our 23-year marriage had been reduced to chains that prevented him from achieving his true potential. Victoria's responses were masterful manipulations disguised as support and understanding. David, you deserve someone who sees your worth, who challenges you to grow, who builds dreams with you, instead of just maintaining what already exists. Life is too short to settle for comfortable when you could have extraordinary. She'd positioned me as the obstacle to his happiness, the safe choice that kept him from reaching his full potential. Meanwhile, she'd presented herself as the exciting alternative, the woman who would elevate him to heights he'd never imagined. Reading their correspondence was like watching a psychological dissection of my marriage. Victoria had identified every weakness in our relationship and exploited each one with calculated precision. David's need for recognition, his frustration with routine, his desire to feel important, she'd fed every insecurity while positioning herself as the solution to his discontent. By Tuesday evening, I had enough evidence to destroy both their careers and expose their affair to Austin's entire business community. But something nagged at me, a sense that I was still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. That's when I decided to use the resources I developed during my most challenging investigations, the kind of tools that required absolute discretion and complete trust. Jennifer Walsh had been my private investigator for over a decade, handling sensitive matters that required someone with her unique combination of legal expertise and creative problem solving. A former police detective turned licensed PI, Jennifer specialized in cases involving financial crimes and domestic deception. We met Wednesday morning at a coffee shop in East Austin, far from the professional circles where we might be recognized. Jennifer was a petite woman in her early 50s with gray-streaked brown hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She'd helped me investigate potential investment partners, corporate executives, and once memorably a charity director who'd been embezzling from cancer patients. 23 years of marriage, Jennifer said after I'd outlined the situation, and he's throwing it away for his boss. Men really are predictable, aren't they? I need to know everything, I said. Financial entanglements, legal vulnerabilities, anything that might give me leverage if this becomes a battle. Jennifer nodded. The affair is obvious enough, but you're thinking there's more. A woman doesn't rise to CEO at 38 without making sacrifices or cutting corners. I said, Victoria Sterling has built her success very quickly, and I want to know how. And David's always been ambitious but fundamentally risk-averse. If he's confident enough to destroy our marriage publicly, someone has convinced him the rewards outweigh the consequences. I want to know what promises have been made and whether they're realistic. Jennifer pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. I'll need complete access to financial records, communication logs, travel receipts. How deep do you want me to go? All the way to the bottom, I said. If there are secrets, I want them exposed. If there are crimes, I want them documented. If there are vulnerabilities, I want them cataloged. This could get expensive, I smiled for the first time in 3 days. Jennifer, I'm worth more than David realizes, and Victoria could imagine. Money is not a constraint. She laughed. I've always liked working for you, Evelyn. You're thorough. I'm also angry, I admitted, but I'm channeling that anger into preparation. When I confront them, I want overwhelming force. Jennifer spent the next hour outlining her investigation plan. She would conduct financial background checks, interview former colleagues and employees, analyze spending patterns, and verify educational and professional credentials. If there were legal problems in Victoria's past or financial improprieties in David's present, she would find them. One more thing, Jennifer said as we prepared to leave. How are you holding up emotionally? Discovering this level of betrayal can be devastating. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence and planning strategy that I'd barely allowed myself to feel the full impact of what I'd learned. I'm angry, I said slowly, but I'm also relieved to finally understand what's been happening. The distance, the lies, the feeling that something was wrong, but not being able to identify what at least now I know I wasn't imagining things. And David? Do you still love him? I considered the question carefully. I love the man I thought he was, but that man might never have existed. The David who could deceive me for 8 months, who could humiliate me publicly, who could dismiss our marriage as an arrangement. I don't know that person at all. Jennifer nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen too many marriages destroyed by deception. Focus on protecting yourself and your assets. Everything else can be sorted out later. That evening alone in the house David and I had shared for over a decade, I sat in my study reviewing the evidence I'd already gathered. Financial impropriety, workplace harassment, systematic deception. The case against Victoria was substantial. David's betrayal was documented in excruciating detail through months of email correspondence. But as I organized the information, I realized I was approaching this investigation the same way I analyzed potential investments, looking for patterns, identifying risks, calculating potential returns. The emotional devastation was still there, but it was contained within a framework of strategic planning that gave me focus and control. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, knowing he was probably with Victoria at that very moment, possibly in the Sterling Digital offices I was funding, definitely continuing the affair that was destroying our marriage. Instead of the hurt and betrayal that would have consumed me a week ago, I felt something colder and more determined. David thought he was managing the situation, controlling the timeline of our marriage's destruction. He had no idea that his wife was already 3 steps ahead of him, building a case that would reshape both their futures in ways they couldn't imagine. I typed back, "Of course, darling, I'll see you in the morning." Then I returned to my computer and continued working. I had evidence to gather, strategies to develop, and a confrontation to plan. The game was just beginning, and David was about to learn that the woman he'd underestimated for 23 years had resources he'd never suspected and determination he'd never witnessed. By Thursday, I would know everything. By Friday, I would be ready to act. The quiet housewife who arranged flowers and smiled at dinner parties was preparing for war. Jennifer's preliminary report arrived Thursday morning via encrypted email, and what I read made me grateful I was sitting down. The systematic betrayal I'd discovered was only the surface layer of a deception that went far deeper than a simple extramarital affair. Victoria Sterling wasn't just conducting an affair with my husband. She was running a sophisticated financial fraud scheme that used Sterling Digital as a front for money laundering and tax evasion. The educational credentials were the first red flag, Jennifer had written. Victoria's Harvard MBA doesn't exist. She attended Rice University for undergraduate work, but never completed graduate school anywhere. She's been using fake transcripts for over a decade. But the academic fraud was minor compared to what Jennifer had uncovered about Sterling Digital's financial operations. Victoria had been systematically inflating the company's revenue through fictitious contracts with shell companies she controlled. The impressive growth that had attracted my initial investment was largely fabricated, designed to attract more capital that she could siphon into personal accounts. She's stolen approximately $3.2 million from the company over the past 3 years. Jennifer's report continued. The money has been moved through a network of offshore accounts and limited liability companies. She's been very careful, but the pattern is clear once you know what to look for. I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of fury and professional admiration. Victoria had committed fraud against my investment theft from the company I owned and tax evasion on a massive scale. She'd built her entire professional reputation on stolen money and fabricated achievements, and my husband was planning to build his future with a woman who could face federal criminal charges. The report on David was equally devastating, though in different ways. Jennifer had discovered that his involvement went beyond simple adultery. He'd been actively helping Victoria conceal her financial crimes. David Harper has been signing false documentation, creating fake client testimonials, and helping establish the shell companies used for money laundering, the report stated. He may not understand the full scope of the criminal activity, but he's definitely a willing participant in financial fraud. My husband wasn't just cheating on me, he was committing felonies with his lover. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, forged contracts with companies that didn't exist, tax returns that bore no resemblance to actual business operations. Victoria had turned Sterling Digital into a criminal enterprise, and David had helped her do it. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was what Jennifer had learned about Victoria's personal life. The ambitious CEO who'd stolen my husband and my money was also married. Victoria Sterling has been married to Robert Chin for 7 years, Jennifer had written. They have 2 children ages 4 and 6. Robert works as a software engineer in Dallas and has no idea about his wife's affair or criminal activities. The family maintains a residence in Dallas, while Victoria lives in Austin during the week for business purposes. Victoria wasn't just destroying my marriage, she was destroying her own family while building a relationship with David based entirely on lies and stolen money. I picked up the phone and called Jennifer immediately. "How confident are you about the criminal activity?" "Completely confident," she replied. "I've documented everything through financial records communications and witness interviews. Victoria Sterling is running a sophisticated fraud scheme, and David is helping her. The FBI would be very interested in this information." "What about the family situation?" Robert Chin believes his wife is a successful CEO working long hours to advance her career. He's been essentially a single parent for 3 years, while Victoria conducts her affair and commits financial crimes. The children rarely see their mother. The scope of Victoria's deception was breathtaking. She'd convinced her husband she was sacrificing for their family's future, while actually stealing money and planning to abandon them. She'd convinced David she was a successful businesswoman worth leaving his marriage for, when she was actually a criminal whose empire was built on fraud. "Jennifer, I need you to do something else," I said. "I want to contact Robert Chin." "Evelyn, are you sure? Once you involve the spouse, this becomes much more complicated. Victoria is destroying multiple families while committing serious crimes," I said. "Robert deserves to know what his wife is doing, and his testimony could be crucial if this becomes a legal matter. I'll arrange a meeting, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that he won't believe you initially. People don't want to accept that their spouse is capable of this level of deception." I thought about my own journey from trusting wife to betrayed investigator. I understand, but he needs to know the truth. That afternoon, I drove to Dallas to meet Robert Chin at a coffee shop near his office. Jennifer had arranged the meeting, explaining only that I had information about his wife that he needed to hear. Robert was a slight man in his early 40s with kind eyes and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who'd been managing 2 children while working full-time. He looked exhausted in the way that parents of young children often do, but there was also something else, a worried uncertainty that suggested he'd been sensing problems he couldn't identify. "Mrs. Harper, I'm not sure why you wanted to meet," he said after we'd ordered coffee. "Jennifer Walsh said it was about Victoria, but she wouldn't give me details." I studied his face, seeing genuine confusion and growing concern. This was a man who loved his wife and trusted her completely, despite her systematic betrayal of that trust. "Robert, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear," I began. "Your wife has been having an affair with my husband for 8 months, but that's not the only deception she's been maintaining." His face went pale. "That's impossible. Victoria works long hours, but she's building her career for our family's future. She wouldn't—" I opened my tablet and showed him the photographs Jennifer had taken of Victoria and David together. Intimate dinners, romantic walks, stolen kisses in parking lots. Robert stared at the images with growing shock, his coffee forgotten. "I know this is devastating," I said gently, "but there's more you need to know." Over the next hour, I walked Robert through the evidence of Victoria's financial crimes, her fabricated credentials, her systematic theft from Sterling Digital. I watched a man's world collapse as he realized the woman he'd married, the mother of his children, was someone he'd never really known. "The money she brings home," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The expensive trips, the jewelry, the promises about our children's college funds, it's all stolen." "Most of it, yes. And Robert, there's something else. Victoria has been planning to leave you and the children to build a new life with my husband. They've been discussing marriage and combining their assets once both divorces are finalized." Robert put his head in his hands. "My children! What am I going to tell my children?" The sight of this decent man's pain reminded me why I was pursuing this investigation. Victoria's crimes weren't victimless. She was destroying real families, real lives, while building her false empire on stolen money and broken promises. "Robert, I want to help you," I said, "and I think we can help each other. Victoria has committed serious crimes, and she's hurt both our families. If we work together, we can ensure she faces consequences for what she's done." He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we document everything, we protect our children and our assets, and we make sure Victoria and my husband understand that their actions have consequences. They've underestimated both of us, and that's going to be their mistake." Robert was quiet for several minutes, processing the enormity of what I'd revealed. Finally, he nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me gather evidence about Victoria's crimes and her plans. I need you to document her communications, her financial activities, anything that might be useful in legal proceedings. And I need you to be prepared to testify about what she's done to your family." "She'll lose her job," he said. "She'll probably go to prison." "Robert, she's been stealing money and destroying families. She's earned whatever consequences come her way." He nodded slowly. "My children deserve better than a mother who's a criminal and an adulterer. What do you need me to do?" We spent another hour planning Robert's role in gathering evidence. As Victoria's husband, he had access to her personal communications, financial records, and travel schedules. He could document her lies, track her spending, and provide testimony about her systematic deception. "There's one more thing," I said as we prepared to leave. "Victoria doesn't know that I own the company she's been stealing from. When we confront her, it's going to be a shock. She thinks she's dealing with the abandoned housewife and a trusting husband. She has no idea she's actually facing two people who know everything about her crimes." Robert managed a grim smile. "She's going to learn that underestimating people is dangerous." "Yes, she is." Driving back to Austin that evening, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but they were overshadowed by a sense of purpose and control. Victoria and David had chosen to destroy our families, but they'd made a crucial error. They'd underestimated their victims. The quiet housewife and the trusting husband were gone, replaced by two people who understood exactly what they were fighting and why they were going to win. The evidence was mounting, the allies were in place, and the confrontation was approaching. Victoria Sterling was about to learn that her carefully constructed world of lies and theft was built on foundations far more fragile than she'd realized. Friday evening found me in my study surrounded by 3 weeks of investigation results, legal documentation, and strategic planning materials. The house felt different now, no longer the home I'd shared with David, but a command center for the operation that would reshape multiple lives. Jennifer's final report lay open on my desk, a comprehensive dossier that read like a federal indictment. Victoria Sterling faced potential charges for embezzlement, tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. David could be prosecuted as an accessory to financial crimes. Both of them had violated numerous civil statutes that would result in devastating lawsuits. But more importantly, I now understood exactly how to destroy their carefully constructed deception with surgical precision. My phone rang and Robert Chin's name appeared on the caller ID. Over the past week, he'd become an invaluable ally, using his access to Victoria's personal life to gather evidence that complemented my corporate investigation. "Evelyn, I've got something," he said without preamble. "Victoria's been on the phone with David for the past hour, planning what sounds like a major announcement." "What kind of announcement?" "They're talking about going public with their relationship at next week's Sterling Digital Board meeting. Victoria wants to present it as a strategic partnership that will benefit the company. She's convinced the board will support them because of the company's recent success." I felt a cold smile cross my lips. Victoria was planning to use the board meeting I would be attending as Meridian Holdings' representative to announce her affair with my husband. She had no idea she would be walking into a carefully prepared trap. "Robert, how are the children handling this?" His voice became heavy. "They're confused. Victoria's been absent so much lately that they barely notice when she's gone, but they can sense something's wrong. 4-year-olds are more perceptive than adults sometimes." "And are you ready for what's coming?" "I've been ready since you showed me those photographs," he said firmly. "Victoria made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences." After ending the call, I opened my calendar and began planning the timing for what I'd privately started calling the reckoning. Victoria wanted to make her announcement at the board meeting perfect. She could make her presentation to a room full of people who would then watch her entire world collapse in real time. I called Marcus Chin to arrange the final pieces of the investigation. "Marcus, I need you to prepare formal criminal referrals for the FBI and the IRS. I want Victoria Sterling arrested immediately after I present the evidence to Sterling Digital's board." "Evelyn, are you sure about the timing?" "Once law enforcement gets involved, you lose control of the situation." "I'm not trying to control the situation," I said. "I'm trying to ensure justice. Victoria has been stealing money, destroying families, and committing federal crimes. She needs to face legal consequences, not just professional embarrassment." And David, the question I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. My husband was guilty of adultery, fraud, and helping conceal serious crimes. But he was also the man I'd loved for 23 years, the father of dreams we'd never had a chance to pursue. "David will face whatever consequences his choices have earned," I said finally. "But I want him to understand exactly what he's throwing away before those consequences arrive." Monday morning brought unseasonably cool weather that felt appropriate for the confrontation I'd been planning. I dressed in my best suit, navy blue Armani, that projected authority without appearing threatening, and gathered the documents that would end Victoria Sterling's career and freedom. The Sterling Digital Board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the company's downtown conference room. As Meridian Holdings representative, I had every right to attend, though Victoria expected me to participate via video conference as I'd done for the past 5 years. Instead, I arrived 30 minutes early and took my seat at the head of the conference table. Victoria entered the room at exactly 10 o'clock, dressed in a burgundy suit that complemented her dark hair and confident demeanor. She looked like a woman who'd already won, someone prepared to announce her victory to a room full of admirers. Her expression when she saw me sitting at the table was worth every moment of preparation. Confusion, concern, and the first flicker of genuine fear crossed her face as she processed the implications of my unexpected presence. "Mrs. Harper," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I wasn't expecting you to attend in person today. I thought this meeting warranted my personal attention," I replied calmly. "Please take a seat. We have quite a bit to discuss." The other board members filed in 3 external directors who'd been carefully vetted when I made my original investment, plus Victoria's deputy CEO and chief financial officer. They all knew Meridian Holdings as the mysterious investor who'd saved the company, but none of them had ever met me in person. "Before we begin with the scheduled agenda," I said as the meeting came to order, "I believe Ms. Sterling has an announcement she'd like to make." Victoria looked trapped but tried to maintain her composure. "Actually, I thought we might discuss the quarterly reports first." "Oh, I insist," I said pleasantly. "Please tell us about this strategic partnership you've been developing." Victoria's face went pale as she realized I knew more than she'd expected, but she was committed to her plan, and retreating now would only raise more questions. "Well," she began hesitantly, "I wanted to inform the board about a significant development in my personal life that may impact the company's operations. David Harper, our senior marketing director, and I have developed a close working relationship that has evolved into something more personal." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. Board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of Victoria's announcement. "We believe our partnership, both professional and personal, will strengthen Sterling Digital's market position and create new opportunities for growth." Victoria continued, her confidence returning as she hit her practiced talking points. "That's fascinating," I said when she finished. "And how long has this strategic partnership been in development?" "Several months," Victoria replied carefully. "We wanted to ensure our personal relationship wouldn't compromise our professional effectiveness before making any announcements." I opened the folder in front of me and pulled out the first set of photographs. Jennifer had taken David and Victoria sharing an intimate dinner at Austin's most expensive restaurant. "These were taken 8 months ago," I said, sliding the photos across the table. "Would you say 8 months qualifies as several months, Ms. Sterling?" Victoria stared at the photographs with growing alarm. "I don't understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," I said calmly. "I'm stating facts. You've been conducting an extramarital affair with a married employee for 8 months. You've been using company resources to fund this relationship. And you've been systematically defrauding this company to support a lifestyle built on stolen money." The room erupted in shocked murmurs as I distributed copies of the financial evidence Jennifer had compiled. Bank records showing fictitious contracts, forged documentation, and the complex shell company structure Victoria had used to launder stolen funds. Furthermore, I continued as Victoria sat frozen in her chair, "You've been conducting this affair and committing these crimes while married to Robert Chin, with whom you have 2 young children." I placed a copy of Victoria's marriage certificate on the table, followed by photographs of her family that Robert had provided. "Ms. Sterling," said Harold Morrison, the board's senior external director, "are these allegations accurate?" Victoria's confident facade finally cracked completely. "You don't understand the complexity of the situation." "Actually, I understand it perfectly," I said. "You see, there's something I haven't mentioned yet, something that puts these crimes in their proper context." I stood and walked to the head of the table, commanding the room's complete attention. "My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm the founder and CEO of Harper Investments, and I am the sole owner of Meridian Holdings, the company that saved Sterling Digital from bankruptcy 5 years ago." Victoria Sterling has been stealing money from me conducting an affair with my husband and lying to everyone in this room about her qualifications, her personal life, and her criminal activities. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at me with the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. The woman whose marriage you've been destroying is the same person whose investment saved your career. I continued, the money you've been stealing belongs to the wife of the man you've been seducing, and the board of directors you've been deceiving is controlled by the woman you dismissed as an irrelevant obstacle to your happiness. Victoria tried to speak, but no words came. The strategic announcement she'd planned had become her complete professional destruction. Security will escort you from the building immediately, I said. Your employment is terminated for cause, which means you forfeit all benefits, stock options, and severance pay. The FBI will be here within the hour to arrest you for embezzlement fraud and money laundering. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Federal agents are in the lobby. Victoria finally found her voice. You can't do this. The board will never support you. David and I have built something real together. The board works for me, I said simply, and David is about to learn exactly what he's throwing away for a woman who faces decades in federal prison. 2 FBI agents entered the conference room, followed by Marcus Chin and Jennifer Walsh. Victoria Sterling, who'd walked into the meeting expecting to announce her victory, was placed under arrest, while her former colleagues watched in stunned silence. As they led her away in handcuffs, Victoria looked back at me with an expression of pure hatred and disbelief. She'd underestimated the quiet housewife, and that miscalculation was going to cost her everything. But the morning wasn't over yet. David was waiting in his office, probably expecting Victoria to call with news of their successful announcement. Instead, he was about to receive a visit that would teach him the dangerous cost of betraying Evelyn Harper. The game was almost over, and I had won more completely than either of them had ever imagined possible. David was standing at his office window when I entered Sterling Digital's executive floor, his back to the door, as he gazed out at downtown Austin's skyline. He looked relaxed, confident, a man who believed his carefully orchestrated plan was proceeding flawlessly. The sound of my heels on the marble floor made him turn, and his face lit up with what I recognized as practiced charm. Evelyn, what a surprise, he said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek with the casual affection of a husband who'd perfected the art of deception. What brings you downtown? I thought you had that charity luncheon today. I studied his face, the same handsome features that had captivated me 23 years ago, now animated by lies and false confidence. This man had shared my bed just 12 hours ago, whispering sweet words about our weekend plans, while knowing he intended to destroy our marriage within days. The luncheon was canceled, I said calmly. I thought I'd stop by to see how the board meeting went. Victoria seemed quite excited about her presentation. David's expression flickered just for a moment, but I caught the flash of uncertainty before his mask slipped back into place. Oh, you know Victoria. She gets enthusiastic about strategic planning, though I'm not sure what specific presentation you mean. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. After 8 months of systematic deception, David had become comfortable with manipulating me. He genuinely believed I was too trusting, too naive, too invested in our marriage to question his increasingly elaborate explanations. David, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk, we need to have a conversation about your future with this company. Something in my tone must have warned him because his casual demeanor shifted slightly. My future, Evelyn, is everything all right? You seem different. I am different, I agreed. I'm finally seeing things clearly. Before he could respond, his office door opened and Marcus Chin entered, followed by 2 FBI agents. David's face went from confusion to alarm as he processed the implications of federal law enforcement arriving at his workplace. David Harper, the lead agent asked, though it was clearly a formality. Yes, but I don't understand what this is about. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, the agent continued, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. David's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the exact moment he realized that his supportive, trusting wife had orchestrated his complete destruction. The shock on his face was profound. 23 years of marriage, and he'd never suspected I was capable of this level of strategic planning. Evelyn, what have you done? He whispered as the agents cuffed his hands behind his back. I've protected my business interests, I replied calmly. Something you should have considered before you decided to help your lover steal from the company I own. The color drained from his face. Your Meridian Holdings. I'm the investor who saved Sterling Digital 5 years ago. I'm the person whose money has been funding your career advancement. And I'm the woman whose marriage you destroyed while conducting criminal activities with my investment capital. David staggered as the full scope of his miscalculation became clear. He'd betrayed not just his wife, but his secret benefactor, the anonymous investor, whose support had made his professional success possible. The board meeting this morning wasn't about Victoria's strategic partnership announcement, I continued as the agents prepared to escort him from the building. It was about presenting evidence of her financial crimes to federal investigators. She's already been arrested. Victoria's been arrested. David's voice cracked with disbelief. But that's impossible. She's brilliant, successful. She's a criminal who's been stealing money and falsifying records, I said. And you've been helping her do it. Every fake contract you signed, every false document you created, every lie you told to cover her activities, it's all been documented. As the agents led David toward the elevator, he looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete devastation mixed with dawning respect. For the first time in our marriage, he was seeing me as I really was not the supportive wife who'd enabled his ambitions, but the strategic mastermind who'd built an empire while he was too self-absorbed to notice. Evelyn, he called out desperately, please, we can work this out. 23 years has to count for something. I stood and walked to my husband, looking into his eyes for what I knew would be the last time. 23 years counted for everything, David. That's why this hurts so much. But you threw it away for a woman who was lying to you about everything, her background, her finances, even her marital status. You destroyed our marriage for someone who was using you to commit crimes. The elevator doors closed on David's shocked face, and I was alone in his office, the same space where he'd planned my humiliation and orchestrated his betrayal. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected, relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what David was hiding or whom he was really with. I wasn't parsing his words for lies or analyzing his behavior for signs of deception. The uncertainty that had been poisoning our marriage was finally over. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert Chen. Victoria's been arrested. The children are with my mother. Thank you for giving me the strength to protect my family. Another message came from Jennifer Walsh. Both arrests went smoothly. The media is already picking up the story. You should prepare for significant attention. I walked to David's window and looked out at Austin's downtown skyline, the same view he'd been enjoying when I arrived back when he'd believed he was in control of his destiny. The city looked different now, full of possibilities rather than threats. My phone rang and Harold Morrison's name appeared on the screen. As Sterling Digital's senior board member, he was undoubtedly dealing with the chaos of losing both the CEO and senior marketing director in a single morning. Mrs. Harper, he said when I answered, the board has asked me to reach out about interim leadership for Sterling Digital. Given the circumstances, we need experienced management immediately. I understand, I replied. I'm prepared to take direct operational control until we can identify permanent leadership. Actually, that's what we were hoping you'd say. Your investigation and evidence gathering has been extraordinary. The board is unanimous in requesting that you consider permanent leadership of the company. The offer wasn't entirely unexpected. I'd been preparing for this possibility since beginning my investigation. Taking over Sterling Digital would mean stepping out of the shadows and claiming public credit for my business success. It would also mean transforming from the anonymous investor to the visible CEO of one of Austin's most prominent marketing firms. I'll consider it, I said, but first I need to address the media attention this situation is likely to generate. By noon, news of the arrests had spread throughout Austin's business community. Victoria Sterling, the rising star who'd graced magazine covers and spoken at prestigious conferences, had been led away in handcuffs for embezzling millions of dollars. David Harper, the charming marketing director, known for his creativity and client relationships, was facing federal charges for helping conceal financial crimes. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was the identity of Meridian Holdings' mysterious owner. Evelyn Harper, previously known only as the wife of Sterling Digital's marketing director, was actually one of Austin's most successful private investors. A woman who'd built an $800 million empire while maintaining complete anonymity. The local business journal's headline captured the story perfectly. The wife who owned everything, how Austin's most successful investor exposed corporate fraud and marital betrayal. Standing in my office at Harper Investments that afternoon, the office I'd occupied for over 2 decades while David dismissed my work as a cute little business, I felt the weight of transformation settling around me. The quiet wife who'd supported her husband's ambitions was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. My assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Harper, there are 3 reporters in the lobby requesting interviews. The Austin Business Journal wants to do a cover story, and someone from Forbes called about a feature on successful women investors." For 25 years, I'd avoided media attention, preferring to work behind the scenes, while others took credit for successes I'd enabled. But that era was ending. Victoria and David's betrayal had forced me into the light, and I was discovering that visibility had its own rewards. "Schedule the interviews for next week," I said, "and prepare a press release announcing my appointment as interim CEO of Sterling Digital. It's time Austin knew exactly who's been driving their business success." The phone rang again, another reporter, another interview request, another opportunity to tell my story on my own terms. The anonymous investor who'd been content to remain hidden was becoming the public face of a narrative about betrayal investigation and ultimate justice. As evening fell over Austin, I sat in my study reviewing the events of an extraordinary day. This morning, David had kissed me goodbye while planning to announce his affair at a board meeting. Victoria had walked into that same meeting expecting to reveal her strategic partnership. Neither of them had imagined they were walking into a trap set by the woman they'd both underestimated. The game was over, and I had won more completely than either of them could have imagined. But victory felt different than I'd expected, less about revenge and more about finally understanding my own capabilities. David and Victoria had tried to destroy my life, but they'd actually freed me to become someone I'd never known I could be. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of Austin's Convention Center addressing 300 business leaders at the annual Economic Development Summit. The same ballroom where David had humiliated me at the company retreat was now filled with people who'd come to hear me speak about corporate governance, ethical leadership, and the hidden dynamics of business fraud. Deception thrives in environments where people are too polite to ask difficult questions. I said, scanning the audience of CEOs, investors, and entrepreneurs. The most dangerous criminals are often the ones who look exactly like successful professionals. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd once been introduced as David Harper's wife was now being featured as the keynote speaker at Austin's most prestigious business event. The transformation had been as swift as it was complete. Sterling Digital under my direct leadership had not only recovered from the fraud scandal, but had become more profitable than ever. With Victoria's criminal schemes eliminated and transparent management practices implemented, the company's actual performance exceeded even the fabricated results she'd presented to investors. More importantly, I discovered that I genuinely enjoyed corporate leadership in ways that managing my investment portfolio had never provided. There was something deeply satisfying about building teams, developing strategies, and creating value through direct operational control rather than passive investment. The personal cost had been significant, but necessary. David's trial had been a media spectacle that exposed every detail of his betrayal and criminal activity. His defense attorney had tried to portray him as a victim of Victoria's manipulation, but the evidence of his willing participation in fraud was overwhelming. He'd been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 4 years if he demonstrated genuine remorse and cooperation with ongoing financial crime investigations. His professional reputation was destroyed, his personal relationships shattered, and his future prospects permanently damaged. Victoria had received a 15-year sentence after refusing a plea bargain that would have acknowledged her victims and provided restitution. Even facing overwhelming evidence, she'd maintained her innocence and blamed everyone else for her circumstances. The woman who'd built her career on manipulation and deception had chosen to lie even when the truth might have earned her some mercy. Robert Chin had divorced Victoria immediately after her arrest and had gained full custody of their children. With my help, he'd recovered some of the stolen money through civil litigation, though the financial damage to his family would take years to fully address. He'd also found unexpected strength in the crisis, eventually launching his own software consulting business with funding from Harper Investments. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they really are. I told the audience, thinking about the painful lessons that had reshaped my understanding of trust and betrayal. My husband and his lover thought they were destroying my life. Instead, they freed me to discover capabilities I'd never fully explored. After the speech, I was approached by dozens of business leaders who wanted to discuss investment opportunities, strategic partnerships, and collaborative ventures. The anonymous investor who'd once worked exclusively through intermediaries was now building relationships based on direct engagement and mutual respect. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the marketing coordinator Victoria had fired to protect her affair with David, approached me during the reception. I'd hired Sarah as Sterling Digital's new marketing director immediately after taking over the company, and she'd proven to be everything Victoria had feared: talented, ethical, and completely unintimidated by office politics. "Mrs. Harper, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity," Sarah said. "Working at Sterling Digital now is completely different from what it was under Victoria's leadership." "You earned the position through merit," I replied. "That's how professional advancement should work." Sarah smiled. "It's refreshing to work for someone who understands that business success doesn't require destroying other people." That evening, I returned to my new home in Tarrytown, a beautifully restored 1920s house that I'd purchased after selling the Westlake Hills property I'd shared with David. The new space felt like a physical manifestation of my transformation, elegant but functional, private but not isolated, a place where I could entertain business colleagues or simply enjoy solitude. My phone rang as I was reviewing the next day's schedule. Jennifer Walsh's name appeared on the screen. "How did the speech go?" she asked. "Better than expected," I said. 3 potential investment opportunities, 2 board positions offered, and 1 very interesting proposal for a documentary about corporate fraud investigation. Jennifer laughed. "You've become quite the celebrity, though I have to say I preferred working with you when you were angry and focused on revenge. You're much more dangerous now that you're happy and focused on success. Dangerous how? You're building something sustainable instead of just destroying what others built. That takes a special kind of intelligence and determination. The observation was more accurate than Jennifer probably realized. The months following David's arrest had taught me that revenge, while satisfying, was ultimately limited in its impact. Building something better, a more ethical company, stronger professional relationships, a life based on authentic achievement rather than supportive roles was far more meaningful than simply punishing those who'd wronged me. My laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Marcus Chen. Over the past 6 months, he'd become my closest business advisor, and unexpectedly something approaching a romantic interest. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and professional collaboration rather than the emotional dependency that had characterized my marriage to David. "How's the most dangerous woman in Austin business?" he asked when the call connected. "Tired but satisfied," I replied, though I'm starting to think that reputation might be overstated. "Not overstated at all," Marcus said seriously. "You brought down a sophisticated criminal enterprise, exposed corporate fraud that could have cost investors millions, and transformed yourself from anonymous backer to public leader. That's exactly the kind of dangerous that smart people respect and foolish people fear." We talked for another hour about business strategies, investment opportunities, and the careful balance between professional success and personal happiness. Marcus understood the complexities of my situation in ways that David never had the weight of significant financial responsibility, the isolation that came with substantial wealth, the challenge of building relationships when people couldn't always distinguish between genuine interest and strategic positioning. Before ending the call, Marcus mentioned something that made me smile. "By the way, I heard from Robert Chen today. His consulting business is taking off faster than expected. He wanted me to tell you that your investment advice has been invaluable." "Robert's success is entirely his own doing," I said. "I just provided capital and encouragement." "You provided something more important than money," Marcus replied. "You showed him that surviving betrayal was possible, that people could rebuild their lives even after devastating deception. That's worth more than any financial investment." After the call ended, I walked through my house appreciating the quiet and the sense of possibility that filled each room. A year ago, I'd been a woman who defined herself primarily through her marriage, her role as a supportive wife, who enabled her husband's ambitions while downplaying her own achievements. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true partnership required mutual respect, that genuine love couldn't coexist with systematic deception, and that the most important relationship anyone could build was with their own authentic capabilities. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been lonely nights when I'd questioned whether exposing David's crimes was worth the personal cost. There had been moments of doubt when I'd wondered whether I was strong enough to build a public career after decades of private success. But those doubts had been answered by results. Harper Investments was more profitable than ever, with a portfolio that reflected my direct involvement rather than anonymous backing. Sterling Digital had become a model for ethical corporate leadership, attracting top talent and premium clients who valued integrity as much as innovation. Most importantly, I discovered that the woman I'd become was someone I genuinely liked and respected, someone capable of building meaningful relationships based on equality rather than dependency, someone who could face challenges with confidence rather than fear. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this place. David and Victoria's betrayal had been the catalyst for the most significant personal and professional growth of my life. Their attempt to destroy my marriage had freed me to discover my true potential. The anonymous investor who'd been content to work behind the scenes had become a public figure whose story inspired other women to examine their own relationships and assert their own capabilities. The supportive wife who'd enabled her husband's dreams had become a leader who built her own vision of success. Standing at my bedroom window looking out at Austin's twinkling skyline, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with my own life and genuine excitement about future possibilities. David was serving his sentence in a federal facility, probably reflecting on the spectacular miscalculations that had cost him everything. Victoria was beginning what would likely be a decade-long incarceration, her stolen wealth forfeited and her professional reputation permanently destroyed. But I was here in a home I'd chosen, leading a company I'd built, surrounded by relationships based on mutual respect rather than hidden dependency. The game that had begun with betrayal and humiliation had ended with transformation and triumph. The quiet housewife who'd arranged flowers and smiled at dinner parties was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that the most powerful revenge was simply becoming the person she'd always been capable of being. The perfect betrayal had led to an even more perfect transformation. And the best part, this was just the beginning. And that, my beautiful viewers, is how a woman who was dismissed as just a housewife became one of Austin's most powerful business leaders. Evelyn didn't just get revenge, she got her life back. This story teaches us something profound. Never let anyone make you smaller than you are. For 23 years, Evelyn allowed David to see her as a supporting character in his story. But when push came to shove, she revealed that she'd been the main character all along. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they really are. David and Victoria thought they were destroying Evelyn's life. Instead, they freed her to discover the incredible woman she'd always been. Ladies, if this story resonates with you, I want you to remember your worth isn't determined by how others see you. Your power doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. And sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming everything you were meant to be. Drop A in the comments if this story inspired you to embrace your own strength. And please share this with any woman who needs to hear that she's more powerful than she knows. Coming up next week, I have another incredible story about a woman who discovered her husband's secret family and used her PhD in psychology to orchestrate the most poetic justice you've ever heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember you are stronger than you know, smarter than they think, and more powerful than they could ever imagine. I'll see you in the next one.